kind of environment that I was in was like the top elite class that you could ever imagine to be in. But I had to remind myself that, like, okay, so what? What happens after this degree and what am I going to do with it?
Mm-hmm.
And going back to the Congo and doing that research really, really humbled myself
Mm-hmm.
in a way that I needed, because I had created this narrative where I was like, oh, like I experienced racism. My life was hard as an immigrant. I have to go and do this. But at the end of the day, it's like, does that stop me?
Mm-hmm.
Did that stop me from doing what I did? Did it stop me from getting into Oxford? It was hard, absolutely,
Mm-hmm.
but it didn't stop me, and it
Yeah.
shouldn't stop me. And
Mm-hmm.
I can't afford to try to act like I'm some elite academic. If I lose touch with my community here in Winnipeg, Canada, if I lose touch with my home back in Congo, then all of that education, all of the work opportunities that I get is absolutely worthless.
Wow, that's powerful. That is amazing. Hey there. Welcome to another episode of Africans Abroad, the podcast. This is your humble host, Christopher Eves Ricks. Today, I believe that this episode is going to be a very special one. Partially because for the first time, I have a guest that I do not personally know. We were introduced through a mutual friend. Thanks, Fiona. And also, it's the first time I have a guest that isn't from my home country, Liberia. This young lady is a Congolese Canadian. She is an actress. She is an activist and an academic. She has done really well for herself. She is really brilliant, and I'm excited to have a conversation with her today. Anyways, without wasting much time, ladies and gentlemen, the next African Abroad on the Africans Abroad podcast happens to be the beautiful Miss Johise Namwira. Did I get that right?
Yeah, Joyce.
Joyce. It's a French name, isn't it?
It's
Is it?
actually my home language, Mashi. It means go and take it to its destination.
All right. That's names are important.
Very powerful.
Yeah, yeah. Anyways, welcome to the podcast, Joyce.
Thank
Welcome.
you.
Listen, I just have to say how grateful I am to have you on the podcast. You took time out of your busy schedule to be here, and I do not take it for granted at all. Thank you for being here, and I'm really excited to hear where this is going to go.
Thanks for inviting me, and thanks for having me.
Yeah, wonderful. So I've already asked you a bit before we started the recording, but how are you doing today? Let's start with that again.
I'm doing great.
Yeah,
It's Saturday afternoon here in Canada. The sun is out, so I'm happy.
yeah, good, good. Shahid, would you like to introduce yourself to the audience? Tell them who you are and what you do.
Yeah, sure. So I think you did a really good job at explaining who I am. I am Congolese Canadian. I moved to Canada with my family when I was about 2 years old. And since then, I've done all of my upbringing here in Canada. So my experience as an African abroad is different in the sense that, I don't have many memories of life back home in the Congo. I
Mm-hmm.
had the privilege of going back for the first time in 2019, which was an incredible experience. But other than that, most of my life has been here in Canada. I went to school here, I did university here, and right now I work with the federal government of Canada. I work on the Minister of Women and Gender Equalities team. And I just recently started this position, and I'm really grateful for the impact that I get to make on her team.
Wow, that's wonderful, really wonderful. But I think even though you do not have memory of your home country, Congo. I still feel like we can take it back a little bit. Uh, do you know why your family had to relocate to Canada from Congo?
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. So I was born in 1997,
Hmm.
and just at this time, we were going through a civil war in the country. And this war has resulted in one of the deadliest conflicts since World War II. So there's been an estimated, I believe, over 5 to 6 million deaths since this trouble. And
Wow.
it's a very complicated situation that has involved different countries that border the Congo, as well as external forces, America
Hmm.
and France. But essentially, this created an environment that was unsafe for my family. So my family actually had to leave our country and go to Kenya for a short period of time.
Hmm.
And it so happened that while we were there, my dad had received a note that there was a German Mennonite couple offering to take people to church, who were at the guest house that he was staying. And so he took the offer, and on the ride to church, they were talking, singing. They built a relationship
Hmm.
that led them to invite him over to their place for dinner. And as he went, he kind of shared the story about how he had to leave his country. And at that time, my mom and myself, I was a baby. We were still in the Congo. My dad was in Nairobi, Kenya. And so he told them the story, and they were moved by it and decided to support us in coming there. And then they also supported us in moving to Canada. And so from leaving the Congo in that context, we moved to Canada in 1999,
Hmm.
and we've been here since.
Wow, that's an amazing story. Do you have any siblings?
I do, yeah. So I
You do.
have three little brothers and
Hmm.
one little sister. Myself and my brother were born in Africa. I was born in Congo. My younger brother was born in Kenya during our transition to Canada.
Wow.
And then my three other siblings were all born here in Canada.
Okay. Okay. Interesting. Wow. Did you first move to when you first moved to Canada? Was it did you and your family move to Winnipeg right away?
So we first moved to Ottawa, which is the capital city of Canada. And the
Hmm.
same German couple who I was telling you about, they actually hosted us in their home for 6 months while we were transitioning into the country. So you can imagine just how this couple, they didn't know us personally. They were not Congolese, they were not African, but they worked by God's grace
Hmm.
to provide us with a home, to provide us with comfort, and we've always kept a relationship with them since then. But you can only imagine like just how interesting it was to live in the household where we were new immigrants moving to Canada. We saw snow for our first time. We didn't speak English. We were understanding the different atmosphere of how life is here in Canada compared to what we were used to back home. Different food, different culture, different environment completely. And they opened their home to us and supported us as we transitioned. They were giving us advice when needed, helped my dad apply to university, and eventually we managed to move out of their home and go to Guelph, where my dad did a master's degree. And then from there, he applied and got a job, which led us to move to Winnipeg.
To Winnipeg. Wow. Amazing. So, your childhood in Canada. What was your experience like? What do you remember? How far back you remember when it comes to your childhood? Living in Winnipeg, was it? Like
Yeah,
you
so
said that
I
you.
in between like a mixture of Guelph and Winnipeg. So my
Yeah.
early childhood was in Guelph, and I have really, really good memories of Guelph. So as I said,
You
my
do.
dad was doing his master's degree at the time. We were living in like a student residential housing,
Hmm.
and the neighborhood that we lived in was super culturally diverse. Like the person who was babysitting us was from South Africa, and then we had neighbors who were from Kenya. We had a Sudanese family who were right down the road. So like it was a very, very culturally rich environment
Hmm.
where We would always have barbecues. We would have birthday parties, celebrations that we would spend together. And I grew up having a strong sense of like cultural pride.
Yeah.
Um, my activism and my love for human rights 100% comes from what I learned and saw from my parents. So they grew up with an intention to make sure that we never forgot our culture. So at home we spoke Swahili.
Hmm.
My dad was really strong in teaching us about the Congo, teaching us about where we came from, and reminding us that we should never forget the work that needs to be done there. So I have videos of myself like at 3 years old, 4 years old, having conversations with my uncle and cousin, telling them about the war in Congo. And this is like a very complicated issue, but I would tell them, the first prime minister of Congo, Patrice Lumumba, they killed him. And this
Uh-huh.
is why. And I was 4 years old asking these very, very important questions. But you can see that like since that age to now, how much it has evolved. And it's because my parents planted that seed in me when I was young, because they took the time to teach me about where I came from,
Right.
that I had that strong foundation. But unfortunately, when we moved to Winnipeg, we actually moved in a community that was very majority white. So I didn't see any more people who looked like me. And that was definitely something that I struggled with. Going into school, I was the only Black girl in my class for a very long time. And I think there were maybe 4 or 5 Black people in the school for most of that time.
Mm.
So as at that age, like from 5 to almost 17, it was very hard for me to kind of have a strong identity and a strong sense of pride in who I was as a Congolese woman,
Hmm.
even though I grew up in such a culturally rich childhood environment where we were always playing Congolese music, eating Congolese food, speaking Swahili at home,
Yeah.
going to Congolese church. When it came to moving to Winnipeg, and I found myself alone, I started to be ashamed of that. And I felt like I had to change myself to fit in.
Right.
So I started to, straighten and relax my hair. I got rid of my Congolese accent completely.
Uh-huh.
And I did everything that I could to make sure that I fit in, because the truth is that at that age, kids notice the difference between race,
Hmm.
and they were very, very quick to point it out. So they
Yeah.
would make fun of me for being Black. They would make fun of my nose. They would be constantly touching my hair, saying that the food that I brought to lunch stank. And I know right now, like it
Yeah.
sounds like it's nothing. Like why would you be offended to that? But as a child who is 5 years old, you don't understand the complexity of racism.
Of
You just
course.
know that people don't like you, and you take that personally.
Hmm.
So for me, I took it personally, and I saw it as a need for me to change, as a need for me to be more like them.
But did the change help? Do you think it helped in any way? You know.
I don't think it helped. I
No.
think it made things very blurry for me. It
Hmm.
made me believe that, as long as I act like them, then I'll be respected and I'll be able to fit in. But the truth is, like my mom always told me, you could pretend as much as you want, you will never be one of them.
No.
So it really took a big reality check for me. I think it actually came in university, where I was like, what am I doing? I
Hmm.
can't keep pretending that I'm someone who I'm not. And I think the biggest change for me in university happened when I finally found a strong group of Black sisters.
Hmm.
And for a woman, especially for a woman living in Canada, living in a majority white environment at school and outside, having that kind of friendship was so, so, so important for me to build my sense of like who I am as an African woman, who I am as a Black woman, who I can cry to and open up to about some of the things that I was feeling. And I'm so, so grateful for those group of women who were patient with me when I was going through the most extra experiences, and who loved me through that.
Wow. That's wonderful. That's very, very amazing, and I'm glad that you were able to find that, because not everybody, not we aren't all that fortunate to find such a group of support people that can support us in uh, you it helped, and I'm glad that it did. But um, You just talked about your experience, in as a child and going through school and all of that. Is there any specific experience during that period of time that stands out, in some way negative?
Yeah,
Like,
I remember the earliest incidents of racism that I can remember. I think I was maybe 4 years old, 4.5. I was very young.
mhm.
And I had a group of friends who I was very close with. Our families were close, and they were having a birthday party. And I remember them saying, like, we can't invite you because you're Black. And at that
Oh,
age, like, I didn't know what that meant. I was like, what do you mean? You don't, as a Black person, most of us, we don't grow up recognizing that we're Black.
no.
We just have a sense of like we're a person. And I think our Blackness is made aware the more that people point it out.
Hmm.
And I think one of the things that was very hard for me as a child was the fact that my experience of Blackness and racism was very different from my parents' experience because they grew up in the Congo in a majority Black environment. So it was never a problem of like, okay, you're not gonna get this job, you're not gonna get this opportunity, you're not gonna face these barriers because you're Black. It was
Hmm.
more of like a class issue. Of course, colorism was still a thing,
Yeah.
but they didn't have an understanding of racism for them to be able to support me when I'd come to them and say, hey, this is what's happening at school. So at
Hmm.
times, like, I actually didn't tell them because I
Hmm.
wanted to protect them from what I was going through. And I didn't want them to see that sometimes I was embarrassed of
Hmm.
being Congolese, of being Black, of
Yeah.
of having the features that I have.
But those comments came from kids your age. Is that right?
Yes.
Wow.
Yeah.
That I mean, one may wonder, where does that come from? I mean, it has to be from home somewhere, like 5, 6 years old, telling a friend that they can't be invited to a party because you're Black. That's kind of, well,
It's heartbreaking and
yeah,
definitely like, a lot of different things that could lead to a kid having that kind of perspective. Sometimes it comes from TV and the media and the way that Black people are portrayed.
hmm,
Sometimes it comes from school environments. Sometimes it can come from the home. Whatever it is, I don't hold it against those children
of course
because I
not.
know that they didn't fully understand what they were saying or doing and the impact that it would have.
Hmm.
But I think now that I look back at it, I recognize that, children are experiencing this and are being affected by it more than we give or recognize.
Yeah. Wow. That's interesting too. So let's move on a little bit further to university time. You got your bachelor's degree in women's and gender studies from the University of Manitoba, and a master's degree in African studies from Oxford University at the age of 22. Am I right?
Right, yeah.
That's amazing. That's really, of course, that's amazing. That's Oxford, the top, isn't it the number one university in the world?
It is.
It
It's the
is.
top arts in the world. Yeah.
That's so amazing. But we're gonna get a little bit deeper into that. But first, why women and gender studies?
I chose women and gender studies because I had tried different classes when I applied to university. I did sociology, I did criminology, I did cultural anthropology. And one thing that I liked about women and gender studies was it's like an interdisciplinary topic, which basically means that you can apply it to any other subject. So you can look at what are the impacts of women and gender in sociology, in cultural anthropology, in criminology. So I was able to take that as my major. So I
Hmm.
actually did an honors degree, which I had to write a thesis, but also take other courses where I could learn and kind of intersect the topics.
Wow. And then after that, did you go directly to Oxford? Or did you go
Yeah,
to work? Yeah. So
yes. And
what?
at it and I'm still like, I don't know how I did that because I was finishing my undergrad thesis while I was applying for master's programs. And the way I did it was, I think I just Googled, like, what are the top universities in the world? And then I was like, okay, I'm going to apply to as many as I can. And I decided I either wanted to do a master's in African studies or a master's in human rights. But either way, I wanted to do African perspectives of human rights. So I applied to 7 schools. By God's grace and by my hard work, I got into all 7 schools. And then I ended up choosing Oxford.
It just keeps getting more and more amazing. Wow. Because that I was going to ask you that if you had a dream, if you had that dream of attending Oxford, or it just the opportunity just presented itself. Like, well, how did that? I mean, okay, you Googled the top schools in the top universities in the world, but was that something you had thought about previously? That you wanted to do.
Yeah, I wouldn't say like it was like a very intentional dream that like ever since I was young, I knew I wanted to do this. But I do know that since I was young, I had a passion for learning and education, and I did the most that I could to advance that. And so, as I said, like as a Black person, sometimes you have to work twice as hard to get half as much. And I was very, very aware of that during my educational experience. There was one experience in high school where I went to the school and they pulled me out of my English class in front of everybody and took me to the hallway, a teacher. And she said, so you're not actually going to be in this English class. You'll be in a separate English class for immigrants who need English as an additional language. And I was like, excuse me, I've been in Canada for 15 years, most of my life. I speak English perfectly fine. And from that moment, like I made it an effort to like do better than everybody in my class. So I not only did I graduate high school and got the highest mark in English, but I skipped a grade. So I graduated in grade 11. So before the people my age. And I left that school kind of with a sense of like, I wish you had noticed that I had this potential. And obviously that's not against any of most of the professors there. The teachers there were great. But to that specific teacher who did that, it just felt so, so great to collect that award on my graduation day and say, it is what it is.
You go, girl. Well, because I actually read that you had the highest grade in English and law, wasn't it? Those are
Yeah.
the law subject. Yeah. And you did it. You completed it in 3 years, which was a 4 years program. So
Yes. Yeah. High school here is 4 years.
yeah. Wow. That I mean, you took that as a motivation. That's awesome. Because
Yeah.
it can be taken, things can be taken different ways. You could have sat with that and just felt sorry about yourself. But you took that as a motivation and it pushed you forward, and that's wonderful to hear. Wow. I keep kind of stopping in between because it's kind of like that. I digest information that I get, and it's pretty good information here. Really good story. So, really, really loving this. Um, Oxford. Uh, at Oxford, your study was concentrated on, let me see if I got this right. Violence against women in conflict, traditional justice, and African studies. And what was really interesting was that your thesis it included 3 weeks of field work in the DRC, your home country.
Yeah.
How was that?
Yeah, so that was a whole experience that I'm so grateful I took part of, but it was also a very challenging experience. So the reason why I did African studies was partly because yes, I wanted to study human rights, but I really wanted to know more about my history and know more about where I come from. And obviously, like you don't need to go to Oxford, you don't need to learn about African history in the UK. Why wouldn't I just go back to my village to do that? Different options. But the impact that I would have was big. So I
Yeah.
remember when I went to Oxford, they have a list of all the students who had graduated from the school. And I think there were only one person who was Congolese who had graduated from there, maybe two. And so myself and one of my other friends, we would have been the first Congolese women to have graduated from that school. So imagine
Wow.
as a graduating from a school like Oxford, which unfortunately has a history of producing research that negatively affected the African continent, but taking that opportunity to have that prestige on your research and then uplifting the voices and stories of the country where I come from is something that I couldn't miss out on. So I saw it as an opportunity to one, be able to study and research my history, but also do the important work of uplifting stories that aren't always positively represented in academia. I
Mm-hmm.
think when you go into like scholarship and writers, you don't always see good perspectives about Africans, and even less perspectives written by Africans. And one of the things that I really wanted to do is really talk about like what is the cultural difference. And one of the chapters in my thesis talked about the importance of language, because
Mm-hmm.
when I was in the Congo doing interviews with survivors of sexual violence, I did my interviews in Swahili and French a little bit. And then I had to translate that back to English so that I could write my thesis. But one of the things that I noticed was like the Swahili worldview is not the same as the English worldview. So there are some things that people would explain in Swahili about their experiences with pain, trauma, spirituality that
Mm-hmm.
you couldn't, they don't have the same kind of words in English
So,
because they don't have that kind of worldview. So I
right.
thought that was really interesting. And I would say that it was also very, very, very challenging because I was going in there as a researcher. And one of the things that we don't always acknowledge as researchers is that you're going in with a sense of possession, that you have the right to these people's stories, that you have the right to go into this community,
Mm-hmm.
take from their information, and then in the end I get a master's degree from it
Yeah.
and they don't get anything. How does that impact their lives? So I went into this with the intention of being really, really forward with the people I was working with,
Mm-hmm.
that, you know, this is what I plan to do with this project. And I also like offered them a token, like a monetary thank
Yeah.
you gift
Yeah.
for participating. But I would also say that like listening to those stories, hearing women as young as me, women who told me, like one girl who was my age, she said she wanted to be a lawyer. I heard from women who were like over 50s who would tell me the most horrific stories of sexual assault in the
Mm-hmm.
context of war. So not only was it sexual violence, but these are stories that happened sometimes in front of their husbands, sometimes in front of their children, and it left them so demoralized that it was actually really, really hard for them to rebuild their lives after that. And there are many people on the ground in Congo doing this work. Dr. Mukwege, Dr.
Mm-hmm.
Dennis Mukwege, one of
Mm-hmm.
them, who won the Nobel Peace
Yeah.
Prize in 2018, who has
Yeah.
been advocating for women in the Congo for years and has done over 1,000 operations to repair their bodies after rape. So I'm really glad that this issue has been, you know, getting international attention. But for me to see that myself, to actually have those conversations, I think was really, really important.
Was it difficult?
It
I
was
mean,
incredibly difficult.
yeah.
There were many days where I couldn't sleep. There were many
Right.
days where I didn't even want to write about it. There's one thing called vicarious trauma, which basically explains that you experience secondhand trauma based on other people's experiences.
Mm-hmm.
And the stories that I was hearing were very, very disturbing. As I said, there were young girls, there were older women who were telling me the most brutal stories of rape during war, seeing people killed in front of their eyes, being raped in front of their children. And to me, I was like, you know, I felt so privileged
Yeah.
that, you know, I was able to come from Canada with my privileged life
Mm-hmm.
and you know, ask these questions and write a nice little paper for a degree. But then these women have to leave that interview and go back to their lives. And I remember one of the biggest things, like I asked a woman, how does it feel to be a Congolese woman? And she's like, what do you mean? And I was very confused because I was like, the answer that I was expecting was she'd say, "Oh, like I live in a developing country. I don't have as many rights as a woman. I have to work really hard in the market. I'm not able to go to school." But then my dad said, like, you're looking at this like an academic.
Hmm.
Think about it like a human. This is all she's ever known.
Yeah.
She hasn't had the life that you have in Canada. She doesn't know what she's missing out of. But what she does know is her life. And she's an expert at that experience.
Hmm.
So just being able to like basically put down all the knowledge that I have and realize that, you know what, these women, they know a lot and they're actually experts in this context. They know the best how to explain the grassroots everyday life of a Congolese woman who is recovering from sexual violence.
Wow. I don't even know how to move on from that. Um, that's that must have been heavy and very impactful on your life. It's I personally, despite all the stuff that we get to experience, negative, here and there where we live here in the diaspora, I really try my best to look at the privileged side of it, how privileged I am compared to, because it's always in relation to something, or compared to people in my country that do not have the opportunity that I have, that's gone through a lot worse than I have gone through. We are very, very much privileged to be here and have the kind of life that we have, the kind of experiences that we have. Yes, we have ups and downs too, but it's just those kind of experiences just really elevates, or makes it more clear to us that we should
Absolutely.
definitely appreciate. Yeah.
I think one of the biggest things that like is that it really humbled me
Hmm.
because obviously going to a university like Oxford, finishing with a degree from there, you're kind of exposed to the elite class. Like we
Hmm.
were having presidents come every week to do speeches.
Hmm.
People were sons of presidents and millionaires. So the kind of environment that I was in was like the top elite class that you could ever imagine to be in. But I had to remind myself that, like, okay, so what? What happens after this degree and what am I going to do with it?
Hmm.
And going back to the Congo and doing that research really, really humbled myself
Hmm.
in a way that I needed because I had created this narrative where I was like, oh, like I experienced racism. My life was hard as an immigrant. I have to go and do this. But at the end of the day, it's like, does that stop me?
Hmm.
Did that stop me from doing what I did? Did it stop me from getting into Oxford? It was hard, absolutely,
Hmm.
but it didn't stop me, and it
No.
shouldn't stop me. And
No.
I can't afford to try to act like I'm some elite academic. If I lose touch with my community here in Winnipeg, Canada, if I lose touch with my home back in Congo, then all of that education, all of the work opportunities that I get is absolutely worthless.
Wow, that's powerful. That is amazing.